Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we are unpacking our latest ebook that we published just the other day, A Pulse on the State of HR for Growing Companies. So if you want, go ahead and hop on the website. You can kind of read along, if you will, suresoftware.com/ebook, A Pulse of the State of HR for Growing Companies. You can find it just in a resource center. It might be easier to navigate that way. And so this deck is laid out really as a summary, right? So what you see here is the thumbnails from the actual book. We have incorporated some of the same graphics maybe to make it easier to follow along. The detail is in the ebook. Really encourage you to download it. If you don't have it, we're gonna record today's webinar. We'll send everybody who registered a link to the recording so you can listen to it another time or share it if you want, along with a link for the ebook. So if you want to follow along, great. Otherwise, we're going to be kind of unpacking kind of the highlights, but also maybe a little bit of the behind the scenes for what we learned in some of the methodology behind and in some of the key takeaways. So with that, we'll go ahead and proceed. So we launched this survey. It was prior to COVID-19. It was to small business owners. Specifically, we're really targeting owners. And we didn't put a cap on the size of business, but generally speaking, we're talking companies that, some of them were micro, less than 5 employees, but going on all the way up to over 100 employees. And what we're really trying to understand is the HR practices and the challenges and the opportunities that were really top of mind for those small business owners who are really working hard and competing to try to grow their business and understand the differences between the growers and the not growers. And so we ended up getting response from nearly 400 different owners. The variety of industries were from food and beverage to accounting firms, daycares, hair salons, consultants, and that was across 26 countries, 26 states all across the country. So more than half of those owners had been operating their small businesses for more than 7 years. So that would mean, just under half, less than 7. So I think the punchline is we got a real mix, right? We got mature businesses, we got really small businesses, we got some pretty good size small businesses in ownership and industry that really kind of crosses the gamut, industry and geography. So regardless of size, what we saw was some common threads emerge, right? In where businesses of all sizes shared some of the same problems. And so we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into what those are. Small is a big deal. And so they became really evident to these small businesses that growth is an important thing. And we'll unpack that in a second. Clearly, reading the data, finding top talent was the #1 challenge that these small businesses faced. I think if you try to read a lot of the popular HR literature, it's written for big companies. It's written for 500,000, 5,000 plus employee companies where this whole quote unquote talent management war has been well documented for a long time. But it's never really been aimed in thought through the small business owner, the entrepreneur's lens. But clearly, the survey told us, the 400 respondents, that getting talent is their biggest issue. Then the next thing is just how do they spend their time? And there's some really interesting things came out of here about how people want to spend their time versus how they actually spend their time. More specifically, how is it that companies are growing spend their time versus want to, and how does that compare to companies that are shrinking that actually spend their time versus they want to? So that's probably the most important takeaway, I think, from this entire study. And then ultimately, culture matters. So, it became interesting how these growing companies, regardless of size, viewed the HR function to companies that were, flat or shrinking. So it's with that lens that we unpack the ebook and walk through this with you. So small is a big deal. And so I mentioned that we did the survey. It was pre-COVID. It was late Q4, so it's still really quite recent. And candidly, we're prepared to launch and planning to launch the results of this study in April. March, April. We were compiling the data in March, and we all know what happened in March and April, right? COVID hit. and absolute game changer. And it seemed silly and candidly rather tone deaf to publish the results of a survey, how to grow your business at a time when we're all, thinking about the safety of our families and survival of our business, let alone growing them, right? As states and municipalities shut down, and what we thought was going to be a 14-day shutdown turned into a several-month shutdown, still going on for some. But as we kind of dusted this off here a few months later, and then dovetailed in some of our research on kind of state of current business, it seemed applicable, right? That for the reasons that growing is so important to small businesses. So, like I said, of the 400-ish respondents that we got on this thing, they indicated that growing was kind of everything to them. So even the roughly half of the companies that aren't growing, it became clear that it's not because they didn't want to. It's not because they had lifestyle businesses that they were just playing golf on Fridays and didn't care to grow it more. They were facing any number of headwinds, right? Maybe mature business, young business, product problems, market problems, any number of problems. But we never interpreted this as the fact that people didn't want to grow. And the reason we kind of extrapolate out that it is such a huge deal is when you're a small business, one customer could double the size of your business. Losing one customer could put you out of business, right? So it's not, at least in the law of numbers, it's not hard to grow a small number. It gets really hard to grow a big number. And when you have a big number, a big revenue, you might actually make more sense to stay flat, but get leaner and become more profitable, put more money in your pocket in the form of profit from optimizing that revenue versus simply growing it. But when businesses are small, it was no secret in the respondents made this loud and clear that growth is everything to them. And what we learned at the time was that 40% truly expected to grow. So in Q4 of 19, 40% of all these small businesses, they expected to grow in 2020, and 10% of them expected significant growth, right? So how did that change with COVID? It's interesting. I think it was Chamber of Commerce that pulled the number on the right-hand side. You'll see the footnotes in the ebook. 57% of small business owners feel positive still about the overall health of their business. So, that 50% sure probably matters a heck of a lot if you're maybe a software development firm versus a bank versus a restaurant versus a bar versus a hair salon, right? Different businesses have been impacted wildly differently. If you're selling video conferencing software, this might be a boom time for you. Ironically, if you're a restaurant, boy, tough times, right? So not going to try to cast too wide of a net with this, but it was interesting, coming off of an economic event like none of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. It's at least about 100 years since something like this impactful has happened to our economy. It's still 57% feel positive about the general health and P&L of their business. 68% believe that their businesses can recover. So 2/3 of businesses still think they recover. Now that might mean a third feel like they can't, which is a fairly scary thing. But when you think about small businesses having nearly a 50% failure rate inside of a 7-year period, I think it really honestly just speaks to the optimism. So maybe not the actual financial health of businesses so much as the spirit of entrepreneurs and the fight and the grit and the willingness to work the butts off and grind. But the punchline was it became clear, and I think the post-COVID surveys validate this, that at least half of small businesses, pretty much all small businesses want to grow, but half of them are in fact planning for growth, even if that growth has not yet arrived. Okay, so one of the things I want to do here as we walk through the pages is kind of compare, contrast, what growing companies, the lens that they see the world, and then companies who are not growing. And I'm going to go deeper on that on the next couple slides. But this area of talent, it really jumps out. So one of the questions we asked in our talent management section of the survey was what are your biggest concerns for growing? And so we say finding talent is the top challenge, but honestly, you see the subtext in the parentheses there for the growing companies. So the number one concern that we saw, if you take your eyes to the bottom left of this slide, for those that were expecting to grow. So what is the biggest challenge you face in this environment if you're expecting to grow? The number one they said was competing against other employers for talent. So the business across the street, the person maybe in your same industry, you're the number two, they're the number one. Maybe you're the no-name startup and there's the 800-pound gorilla in your industry. In the number one concern for companies who had plans to grow. Now, this doesn't mean they would grow. We don't have any access to their financial records, but this is self-reporting. But those who said they were either growing or going to have significant growth at 40 and 10%, their number one concern was competing for talent with their other competitors, right? Now, the number one concern, keep in mind the context of these questions are all HR oriented, right? The biggest HR concern for companies not planning to grow was it kind of paperwork, right? It was the quote unquote a cumbersome hiring process. You can read the study, it's a little more detailed than that, but it's a paper-based manual processes around hiring and onboarding employees. And this is a real lens into the meat of the study that we're going to unpack in about two slides from now. But we've all heard about talent, right? And the important in the hunt for talent. But this is so telling how the companies in growth mode see their number one concern. It was competing, like truly competing. Think sports. You're competing for that talent versus having a cumbersome administrative process. It reminds me of a story. I used to be in the software business, and I remember there's always the comparison about hiring inexpensive programmers. Sometimes offshore dev groups versus maybe a much more expensive per head local or from industry experienced dev people. And there was kind of the joke / example that how many, if you were going to hire newly graduated music students, therefore inexpensive music students, how many of them would it take to write Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? And the answer is none. You could hire one, you could hire 100, you could hire 1,000. 1,000 of them together could never write that because it was the work of a genius. It was talent. Only a genius with that kind of talent could write it. And so it only took one person, but it took the right person. And same thing in the software world. You could hire interns, you could hire new grads, you could hire offshore, you could build very inexpensive on a per head count teams. But if your focus wasn't talent, you might be able to crank out, 10,000 lines of code a day very inexpensively. But what if you had that one programmer who was so brilliant they came up with the algorithm that didn't need 10,000 lines of code. They needed 400 or 500 lines of code to accomplish the same thing. And therefore they were so much faster. The product ran on less energy consumption and more efficiently, and the list goes on. The punchline is this is all about talent, right? This is not about headcount and putting butts in seats, but the companies who are really in growth mode and actually having plans to grow, not just desiring to grow, they saw their number one concern different. Now, I think it's worthwhile mentioning, the right half of the screen, the lower right. What's the COVID-19 impact? And I think at least for a short term, the supply demand curves have kind of reversed roles, right? At least temporarily. And because no fault of their own, there are some extremely talented people that their businesses maybe had to shut their doors or shut their doors temporarily. at minimum disrupted. And so I can tell you firsthand experience here at Assure, and for sure I can tell you, talking to customers and entrepreneurs and friends of mine who are entrepreneurs, there is more talent in the marketplace today than there has been maybe in our lifetime. So you think about the unemployment rates with all these shutdowns. It's I don't want to make light of it. It's a tragedy, right? It's a terrible thing that everybody has to wade through. But this is a moment in time where business owners who are savvy and willing to act, I would say act boldly and make big decisions. And what does a big decision look like? A big decision might be, I don't have that headcount budgeted for, but that person is so good, I'm going to slot them anyway as long as I can cash flow it. A bold decision might be, I've got some people on my team who meet the minimum requirements. I like them, they're nice, but they're never going to get us to the next level. And you might have to upgrade talent, and it's a damn difficult thing to do as a boss. It never should be an easy thing for anybody, right? But as a champion for small businesses that are trying to grow, we would just be foolish not to at least point out that the story on the left, you gotta think how you think about growth and how you think about talent. But we have a window in time here. You also have to think about how could you possibly act boldly and upgrade the talent of your business to drive growth. Okay, so the next thing we explored that just stood out is where people were spending their time. And so no surprise to anybody in the call, we surveyed, got responses from 400 businesses. A huge percent of these were business owners, right? So it's not just little micro shops, 2, 3, 4, 5 employees. There's some good sized companies here, 50 and 75 and 100, 150 employees, where you have an entrepreneur owner, or at least a head executive for the company. But by nature of being, not a large enterprise, where is it they're spending their time? In owners, people literally with business owner titles, as self-reported in the responses, 30% of their time is spent in HR management. Or, excuse me, 30% of them are spending their time in HR management, 30% of their time in record keeping, 40% spending their time in employee tracking. So this is not meant to be an overt sales pitch for Assure. There's a million different vendors you can choose. But it does scream, if you think about the prior slide, what's the one focus for the growing companies to spend on talent, to focus on talent, not administration, but yet you look here where all businesses spend their time. Business owners are spending their time on tasks that could easily be, if not completely automated, they could at least be improved, right? And streamlined by becoming electronic. From removing paper and adding self-service for HR management to electronic record keeping instead of keeping a W-9 piece of paper in a file folder in a desk. I mean, in a COVID world, how do you have to even go to an office to even collect those? You got to be electronic. And then employee time tracking. It's an embarrassing number of people still. You might use Excel, but it's still manual if you use Excel to add up people's time to then key into a payroll system, right? So all across the board, it became clear that people are spending too much of their time in these manual tasks. But what seemed maybe more interesting to explore was if we would compare this against how people want to spend their time versus how they actually spend their time, and then break that down another layer. What does that look like at shrinking companies versus growing companies? So let's first look at how people want to spend their time. So we'll take our eyes down the first column, the want column, right? And so the first row is growing companies. So this is how they self-reported their wants versus how they actually do it. So wants, growing companies, the first 4 things, right? Employee performance reviews, employee recognition, improving employee culture, providing professional development. All of those are really strategic, right? They're all about getting the best people and developing them, creating a culture where we all succeed, and it's a winning, growing culture in developing and growing people. Number 5, what do they want? Well, they want to spend more time handling employee issues. I'd be curious if we peel back the onion what employee issues look like to them. But clearly, in the want column for growing companies, they want to spend their time 1 through 4 developing their people and growing their people and creating a winning culture, right? And if you look at companies who are shrinking and you ask, how do you want to spend your time? Well, the way they say they want to spend their time, number 1, employee recognition. That's great. Number 2, reporting and analysis. 3, employee issues. 4, writing and posting job descriptions. Number 5, onboarding, verifying employees. I mean, if I look at that, that's so kudos on number 1. But number 2 through 5 is administrative, right? So the companies who are literally shrinking, it's their heart's desire to do 2, 3, 4, 5. So 4 of the top 5 ways they want to spend their time around administrative tasks. And now that might sound silly, like who would want to do that? But it's probably a reflection of, we'll jump over to the column on the right about how they actually spend their time. But certainly if nothing else, it's a look through 2 different lenses. The lens of a growing company thinks about people and how to develop those people to get them around a goal and create a winning culture. And the lens for a shrinking company is how to do paperwork better, right? And how to be better at administration. Now, if we flip the script here and look to the right, look at the actuals. So how do growing companies actually spend their time? Well, tracking time and attendance, okay. That's administration. Number 2, HR forms. 3, employee records. 4, handling employee issues. So it's like the top 4 of how they actually spend their time. Well, that's not always just focused on people, that's administration, right? Maybe that explains, but then you look at number 5, at least cracking the top 5, how they actually spend their time, there is a focus on culture. That those companies trying to grow, even though they probably spend way more time than they want on administration, as evidenced by the difference between how they actually spend time and how they want to spend time, at least they're doing something today about working on culture. Now, you flip to the bottom right, the companies that are shrinking, how are they spending their time? Okay, job descriptions, paperwork, HR forms, onboarding, verifying, time and attendance. Literally 100% of the way they spend their time is administrative, right? There's nothing strategic about developing employees, growing people, finding the right people, the right talent, building a winning culture. And so I think that probably I think we could give these folks some credit, because they might be a shrinking business for reasons out of their control. If you're in the airline industry, I mean, there wasn't a heck of a lot you're going to do to have your business not shrink. If you're running a hotel or a restaurant, I mean, the economic headwinds are way larger than the talent you might bring as a leader, right? So we're not saying that they're shrinking because it's their fault or they're bad managers, but it's still telling. The lower right, literally 0 strategic, how they actually spend their time, 100% of their time being spent in administrative functions, kind of probably then explains their desires on the left, right? That the number 1 thing they want to do is, God bless, we want to at least recognize our employees. And while 2 through 5 on the bottom left are still administrative, in a lot of ways, it's at least improvements upon what you see on the right. So what you see in the bottom right, managing HR forms, at least number 2, they want to have HR reporting and analysis so they can grow, right? So I don't think we can state the impact and importance of this slide. It'll be this page in the ebook, that when we think about how is it that companies are growing, just how they see the world, whether it's their fault or not that they're growing. Maybe they're not great managers and they're just dumb luck. They're in an industry that is just growing and they're riding the wave. Doesn't matter. The way in which they see the world is clearly different from an HR perspective, that they see HR as a function of developing and growing people in culture, and those who are shrinking, regrettably, see HR as an administrative process. So I hope that sinks in, because I think that kind of means everything about how you view it. So the last big takeaway, and it really, I think, kind of ties back, is that culture really matters. And what became clear from our study and then all of our other research is that it matters early. So we published another ebook earlier in the year that underscored this exact same point, that the culture you develop at employees 0 through 5 really has legs through employees number 50, right? If you don't start to manage and create culture until employee number 50, you're going to get the culture you get as you grow to employee number 100. So the successful companies were obsessing about what the culture of the company was going to be from the beginning. And when we asked the question, what are the top 3 things that were impacting your ability to create culture, they all came back to talent. The answers all came back around talent. Number 1 was competing against big companies. So why do there's the old saying, people join companies and they leave bosses. Why would you lose an employee to a big company? Probably the perception of culture, and maybe that perception could be as silly as free snacks and a ping pong table in the break room, or maybe it's compensation, maybe it's how they reward their employees and the freedom they give them to do the work they want, right? Regardless of the reasons, that was the number 1 thing that the respondents feared about impacting culture, because they felt like they could lose talent to the big companies. Number 2 and number 3, it's really the same things. It's work-life balance. So quite literally, the respondents to the survey came back with these 3: competing for talent, work-life balance, perks and amenities. But I think they all just, if you think about it, they tie back to culture. People join companies, they leave bosses. So if your employees perceive the grass is greener on the other side, aka a better culture, then that's where the threat lives. And then we just kind of teased out as a separate topic a little bit about millennials. And I'm going to let you read. I'm not going to read the comments. I will say they're fairly disparaging against millennials. Ask the question, what things do you seek to understand about millennials in the workforce? And the responses, it was a free-form question. The responses were not flattering to how the respondents viewed millennials. So I put some stats here to kind of maybe help sink in. Clearly, the respondents were frustrated managing millennials. But if you're frustrated managing millennials, you don't have another strategy but to figure it out, because millennials make up 31.5% of the world population. Gen Z is 32%. By 2025, so in just a few years from now, millennials in the US are going to make up 75% of the US workforce. So I think, forgive my language, I think it's time to kind of quit our bitching about the challenges. And I think some of these challenges are totally valid, right? I mean, the Gen X to the millennial to the Gen Z, they really do have different characteristics as a single group. But at the end of the day, you're managing individuals, right? And so acknowledging some of the top trends, I think there's a call to action for a lot of small business owners. If you have 5 employees and you're adding number 6, maybe you can hire a non-millennial. But if you're trying to grow a company and you're going from employee 5 to someday 50 or 500, guess what? You're not going to be successful. You don't have some millennials and some Gen Zs in there, because it's just that's just what the demographics say. So you can read more detail. I won't say the disparaging comments other than to validate. I get it, but it's also a call to action to work on it. So with that, I think the last thing that we wanted to give some guidance here in this ebook was some considerations before returning to work. So I'm being super simplistic here in just kind of highlighting the top 5. There's a lot of fine print here. There's a really nice survey here, excuse me, the interview that we did with our own VP of HR, Cheryl Tribula, that has the real meat behind each of these 5 topics. But how do we think in a COVID context about all these things, whether it's performance management and talent management and culture, when, hey, guess what, the governor just shut our state down, forget all that stuff. I'm thinking about how do I actually just like live day to day. So we're trying to give some really practical guidance that we're not tone deaf. We know what the reality is here, but how do you think about building a culture, a winning culture for your company to grow while you are still kind of in the reopening business in bringing employees back to work? So number 1 is you got to keep your virtual doors open even when the physical doors aren't. So that kind of just is what it says it is, right? If you're in a shelter order, that doesn't mean you stop communications with your employees. Now, if you're a barbershop, hard to put hands on customers when you can't open your doors. That doesn't mean you as a boss can't continue to talk to your staff, plan, train, watch videos, virtual cocktail hours, something to maintain connection, right? Number 2, be transparent. Your employees, regardless of what generation they come from, are adults. They can and need to handle the truth. Be transparent about everything that you're doing. Number 3, make real connections through virtual onboarding. So there's great tools. Use them, whether it's your iPhone and just doing simple FaceTime, or using one of the more modern business tools, do some video conferencing. We don't have to do everything via phone and email. Make real connections. Number 4, put workers first by implementing flexible, supportive policies, right? We as entrepreneurs, business owners, we're going through real stuff right now, right? Our employees are going through some real stuff too. You got a loved one who's sick. You've got an elderly person in the home and a kid going back to school. There's a lot of scary stuff and things you got to deal with way beyond work. So be flexible, be patient, but more than just personally, implement policies and communicate and demonstrate those policies so that everyone understands them. And then number 5, this should go without saying. It shouldn't be a policy. It's a value, right? You care about people. You care about their safety. You got to create a work environment that honors that. So with that, I want to thank you. That takes us through the ebook. The fine print is there. You can learn more details, but I wanted to share with you the kind of the punchline, and it's this: companies who are growing see HR as a strategic thing. It's all about finding the right people, developing and recognizing and growing those people, and then developing a winning culture that you can grow your business. Companies who are shrinking, maybe through no fault of their own, the data is clear. They see HR as an administrative compliance function. No question, there's some administrivia and there's some compliance that goes along with HR, but it's a heck of a lot more fun working with companies trying to help them grow their businesses, working on the strategic stuff. And with that, my 15-second infomercial is that's what we do. We at Assure see human capital management, HCM, through the lens of business owners and entrepreneurs and executives of mid-sized companies. For us, there is you got to get your paycheck right. You got to file your taxes accurately and on time. You have to follow the laws. But really, we think about human capital management as how do we help grow your company by finding better people, developing those people, and developing winning cultures. And with that, I invite you to download the ebook. And I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Look for an invite. We will be sending for next week. As you guys probably know, if you're watching the news, President Trump signed an executive order when Congress didn't, as expected, I would say, pass any legislation. I think we've been tracking the HEROES Act, we've been tracking the HEALS Act, both in the House of Representatives and the Senate. We expected there to be some type of reconciliation before they went on recess last Friday. It didn't happen. So President Trump signed an executive order. There are still a ton of open questions. We are going to have a webinar on this next week. I believe it's Thursday. You look for the invite. We are expecting to get guidance from the IRS, general counsel from the IRS, actually on Saturday. So today, we understand the guts of the law. We understand the guts of what's going to be required and how small business owners can plan for this. But frankly, there's more questions than there are answers. We expect to get most of those answers, at least the lion's share of the important answers on Saturday from the IRS. And then we're going to unpack that and share that with you next week, because the thing starts to get implemented on September 1st. So clock's ticking, and we're looking forward to getting guidance from IRS so we can share all that with you. And with that, I want to thank everybody for your time and wish you well. Have a great day.